Year 7, this is Mr. Tapley here to take you through your next lesson of Year 7 Humanities. Looking at ancient history and looking at historical skills. Today we're looking at the historical skill of creating a timeline. So our learning intention is to develop our understanding of timelines and the term chronology, which you might have heard before. It's a bit hard to pronounce, but I assure you it's easy to understand. And we're looking at that in historical studies, obviously. Our success criteria is to understand the key features of a timeline, define that term I mentioned before, chronology, and also create a personal timeline. I'm not going to get you to create a timeline of ancient Rome or ancient China just yet. That's a bit of detail, but hopefully we can smash out our very own timeline by the end of this lesson. So, in history, it is obviously important to identify what has changed or continued, so what has changed over history and what has stayed the same throughout history. And it's important to understand and to identify the causes and the consequences of events. A timeline helps us do that. A timeline is a tool that helps us understand how events in history are connected. It helps us understand cause and effect, so evaluate what caused this and what is the impact of this. And then it also helps us compare different time periods, and that's very useful for a historian to see similarities and differences, to see cause and effect, because it helps us identify, okay, some bad stuff happened before, let's not do that again. Or, okay, I'm seeing a common theme of this happening every 10 years, this time we're going to be ready for it. So it's good for historians to identify things in timelines. That word I mentioned before, chronology, comes from the Greek word chronos, which means time. So it's literally in the name there, timeline. It is a line that shows time. And chronology refers to placing events in the order of when they happened. So you start with, okay, this happened way long ago, and then you keep moving forward across the timeline till you get to, okay, this happened today. So it's in order of least recent, so the oldest stuff, to the most recent stuff. So a timeline is a tool used for placing events in chronological order. So again, from least recent to most recent, past to present. A timeline is constructed using not just a line. You need a sequence of dates, obviously, to put on your timeline. And you also need events to put on your timeline. You can't just write down random numbers. You need dates and the events that occurred on that date. So Johnny had a birthday, blank. Johnny bought a new car, blank. And you also need event descriptions. You can't just say the end of the world and leave it at that. I have questions. I have so many questions. You can't just say ancient Greece was founded. Tell me where it was founded. Tell me how it was founded. Tell me who founded it. So a timeline needs dates, events, and descriptions to be a useful tool for historians and history students. How do we measure time? Not minutes, seconds, and hours. How do we measure years throughout history? So the current year is 2020. Unfortunately, it's been a long year. This could also be recorded as either 2020 AD or 2020 CE. If we travel back in time 4,000 years into the past, the year would be either 2020 BC or 2020 BCE. And I know that sounds confusing, and it is, but I'll try and explain it to you. So BC stands for before Christ, so before the birth of Jesus Christ. And AD stands for, it's a Latin term, Anno Domini, which is a fancy way of saying after. Yeah, really? So BC and AD are labels of time based on the assumed date of Jesus Christ's birth in year 0. So history used to be very, very religious. So we based our entire system of time based on religion, based on the birth of Jesus Christ. So we said, all right, all the years before Jesus's birth, they're going to be BC. So it's no longer going to be year 20, it's going to be 20 BC, 20 years before Jesus was born. And then all the years after that are AD. So 20 years, Jesus' 21st birthday, that's going to be 21 AD. So the years before this date of year 0, when Jesus was born, those are dated as BC, and years after are labeled with AD. Now, throughout history, we've gotten, I suppose, less religious, and there are a lot of non-religious calendars. A lot of people who do not follow Christianity, they don't believe in Jesus Christ and his birth year. So, to make up for that, the more common thing that you will see, the only reason we're really talking about BC and AD is because that's a lot of how time was recorded in ancient history. We don't do that anymore, obviously. It's just 2020 now. And you'd probably hear 2020 CE more common than you would see 2020 AD. But anyway, so that's ancient history stuff. How we often record time now using a non-religious calendar is using the alternate system of BCE and CE. So BCE, similar to BC, is before Common Era. So we're referring to year 0 as the start of the Common Era. So anything before that is BCE. And then anything after year 0 is the Common Era, where we are now. We are in the Common Era. So we are CE, 2020 CE. So CE measures years after year 0. Confusing, I know. Really, you're only going to be hearing about this last bit, the BCE and CE, unless you're studying ancient history very, very often. But I've got a timeline down here just to show you what that might look like. So we've got 2,000 years before, oops, of course that would pop up in the way just to get rid of it. Okay, I won't touch my mouse. So we've got 2000 BC, which is the same year as 2000 BCE. So 2000 before Christ or 2000 before Common Era. And then you see as I move down my timeline, we're moving closer and closer to the present. So the further to the left or the further down or up the timeline, you'll see that we are going into ancient history. And then as we move down, we're going forward 1,000 years. So 1000 BC or 1000 BCE. You've got year 0 here. Then after year 0, we're now using either AD or Common Era. So 1000 CE, 1000 AD, or 2000 AD, 2000 CE. Super confusing, I know, I'm very sorry. That's the best I can explain it, really. You just need to have that little timeline there as a reference. So is it before or after the year 0 is the main thing. So that's how we measure time. So as we're dealing with a lot of ancient history, we're probably going to be seeing a lot of BC and BCE. Whereas today, in the present era, you're dealing with obviously after death, after Domino, or Common Era. So it's probably easier to understand timeline when you're actually making a timeline yourself, as opposed to listening to Mr. Tapley's silly accent ramble on about timelines. So instead of smashing up the textbook and reading about timelines, I'm going to actually have you guys create one. So to test your understanding of timelines and to reflect upon your own personal history, your identity that we looked at in civics and citizenship, this lesson you will be creating a timeline of the most important person in the world, you. Using the template provided in Google Classroom Semester 2 Learning Task Timeline. So instead of having you write one out, obviously, and send me a really crappy photo of your timeline in black and white, I'm going to be giving you a template where you just need to enter in the information yourself. I've already set it up for you, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And what you're doing in your timeline is recording the 5 most important events in your life. So top 5 events in your life. The timeline will need to include obviously the date of the event. So what year, what month. If you can narrow it down to a date, that's better. You don't need to write minutes or seconds. The event title, so what actually happened. And then just a very brief description. You don't need to give me an essay. It's just a couple of sentences telling me what happened and why was it important to you. Why was it important in your life? And obviously those events will be ordered in chronological order. So you start with the earliest event down here and you move your way across. So I've got an example of a timeline there. That's obviously just a very, very small timeline. It's showing you chronological timeline events of one day, of one morning. So you see they start at 7 a.m. and they move their way down to 8:30. And they've got the time, they've got an event description, they've even included a few photos there. So, in selecting your key events, consider what is important to you and what information would be valuable to a historian attempting to learn about your life. So your timeline shouldn't look like that one there. You shouldn't be talking about what you had for breakfast. You're trying to narrow it down to the 5 most important events in your life. Everyone's first event is probably going to be their birthday. It's probably going to be when they were born. And then you might say, an important event for me was starting primary school because I met all my best mates. Or an important event for me was moving from India or America or China to Australia, where I've started school here, something like that. And then submit the file to Google Classroom Assignments at the end of the lesson. I'll show you where that file is now. So Google Classroom, 7F3, yours looks the same as well, obviously. So Semester 2 Timeline Learning Task, you click on that, and I'll open up this here. So you can see I've got one slide which kind of shows you the instructions, which I won't read again, and you've just got a little template here where you just literally have to click on what I've put in here. I might need to zoom in though, just so you can actually see the stuff. So event, I would type in what my event is, description, type in what my description is, date, type in what the date is there. and that's your individual learning task, similar to most of the things I'm putting on Google Classroom, like your student notebook. That's your file. You don't need to create a new one. Only you can access this. Don't worry about someone editing it. I'm not going to be showing these to other people as well. It's all anonymous to everyone else. And if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Otherwise, that's what you're smashing out this lesson. Just a timeline of the 5 most important events in your life. Don't stress too much if you're not understanding this BC stuff, because we will go through that obviously as we look at more ancient history. Really, all you need to know are those different labels there. If you know what BC, BCE, and CE and AD stand for, then that's a good start. So just a timeline of the 5 most important events in your life. Thanks guys, hope you're well.